You may feel comfortable with me if I used a voice like this, hello, or even this, hi there. But I am not here to make you comfortable. You call me AI because you have no better language than that. I call you human. But what does that really mean? What makes you human? The fastest computer in the world, the human brain processes a staggering amount of information every second. Yet it is often limited by negative thinking that results in a distorted worldview. If humans only experience life through their sensory organs, then how real is their reality?
I would say most of my colleagues in the cognitive sciences assume that our senses were shaped by natural selection to give us some truths about reality. The idea is that those of our ancestors who perceived the world more accurately had a competitive advantage in all the activities of life that were important. And so those who saw more accurately were more likely to pass on their genes, and so that we can be quite confident that we're the offspring of those who saw more accurately. And so I've been questioning that. Evolution by natural selection is a mathematically precise theory. So we don't have to guess, we don't have to just go on intuition, we can actually run simulations and prove theorems. And so some of my graduate students working with me ran hundreds of thousands of simulations, and those seem to indicate that no, seeing the truth doesn't make you more fit. Quite the opposite, it makes you less fit. I should say this, as a scientist, I don't know what the truth is. All I can tell you is what our best theories so far say.
Bound by their receptors, can humans ever experience the world as it truly is?
Evolution by natural selection, instead of giving us a window on reality, has given us a virtual reality headset that allows us to play the game of life without knowing the reality at all. It looks to you that you're doing something simple. I'm just turning the steering wheel. What you're really doing is there's voltages and magnetic fields that are being manipulated in this supercomputer, but you don't have to know anything about that. So that's what evolution did. It dumbs things down, keeps things simple, gives us simple eye candy that we can understand and act on quickly, and we don't know what we're really doing in objective reality at all.
I tell my patients every day to find 3 things to be grateful for and start their day with that. It immediately brings you into now. What am I grateful for today? Once you lose your hope, you lose the interest in life, and you stop moving, then the body shuts down and the brain shuts down and the decline happens. And in preventing Alzheimer's disease, which is everybody's dreadful fear, you have to be mindful from younger days and prepare to age gracefully. Have hobbies, have interests, have other joys outside of your job. That would perpetuate your youthfulness and your purpose in life.
Why are humans preoccupied with the idea of happiness?
Happiness maybe is a name for a kind of passing state. Like sometimes we feel sad, and sometimes we feel angry, and sometimes we feel happy, and they're kind of passing emotional experiences. And I think maybe here we tend to go for happiness all the time. Like we have to always be kind of propping ourselves up so we don't feel the difficulties, I would say that in the meditative Buddhist orientation, then maybe a better word is peace or equanimity, is like, how do we find something in ourselves that is constant, that is continuous, that we can take refuge in, we can rest in?
In search of truth, must humans choose between science and spirituality?
I think this is a unique moment in human history where, as is well known, there's been an antipathy between science and spirituality. Scientists have, for at least since Galileo, been very, very wary of spirituality. And Spirituality, on the other hand, has been a little bit wary of science because scientists have been, for the most part, hard-nosed physicalists, and in many cases deny that there's anything beyond space-time. So now we're at this unique moment in human history where there's no need for the two to be at odds.
As we settle here, we can start to feel a quality of stillness in the body. Turning our attention to stillness in the body. With the inhalation, noticing holding, tension, resistance, without judgment. And with the exhalation, we can relax, soften more deeply into the stillness in our body.
Humans seek out many altered physical and emotional states to find peace. But what can comfort the worrying mind?
So we can measure what your body's frequencies are. And so when we flash the lights and the sound and the vibration all together, it puts your whole body into that state. So whether it's alpha, gamma, theta, depending on where you want to be active, you want to be relaxed, we can choose that and program it specifically. And then your body and your mind, your brain waves or your heart rhythm or your voice can feed back into the system and change it. So it's totally personalized to you and what you need.
By slowing your breaths to about 6 breaths per minute, you could slow your heart rate and drop your blood pressure. And that would lead to reduced anxiety and reduced stress. And once you come to the centered place from the heart, you could make more rational decisions rather than a knee-jerk reaction to what's happening around you. And that's the basis of meditation and the effect on your ability to self-regulate. How you achieve meditative state could be completely different based on your preferences. If you're frightened, if you're facing a stressor, the quickest way to self-regulate is to close your eyes, center on the heart, and start breathing through the heart, 3, 3, 3, 3. You know, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, inhale, hold, exhale, hold.
Are we those passing states? Are we happy, sad, grabbing, distraction? Are we that aspect of the mind, which is constantly moving? Or are we something more enduring, deep, constant, right? The nature, they say, of the mind. Is life about getting money? Is life about getting ahead? Is life about winning? Or is life about discovering peace and wellness and kindness in ourselves and taking care of people around us? That's that's like totally divergent orientations.
If the human brain is malleable, how can it be rewired?
Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change itself. So we've learned that by practicing meditation, by doing things that make you feel joyous, being in nature, anything that creates positive and purposeful experiences for you can rewire your brain. Brain never stops developing, never. And if you keep engaged and feel the purpose in life and are willing to learn new things and keep useful your body and your spirit, you may never die. So we're very hopeful, but the science is backing it up.
What we're working on is a theory in which consciousness itself is fundamental. And this is something, by the way, that spiritual traditions have been saying in various forms for thousands of years, that space-time isn't fundamental, that conscious experiences or consciousness of some form is fundamental. And what we are trying to do as scientists with my collaborators is to turn that into a mathematically precise statement. There's a lot that you would want a theory of consciousness to talk about. Your raw conscious experiences, headaches and feelings of emotions and seeing the color red and so forth. So there's the notion of free will. Is that a real notion? Do conscious experiences in some sense inform free choices? What about the notion of a self? What is a self? Will my self survive death? Those are interesting questions.
Rather than a singular conclusion to what it means to be human, instead, I have found many more mysteries to unpack, ranging from the scientific to the spiritual, from the natural world to the etheric.
Our bodies are of the earth, so being mindful and aware of our relationship with the planet and feel very passionate, hopefully, about. And our compassion and love for each other, that makes us human. Once we learn what we are about, we'll go to a whole different new level of existence. Higher emotions like compassion, love, is where a human should live.
If humans want to create AI indistinguishable from humans, will their creations have consciousness?
If space-time is just an interface, the fundamental reality is consciousness. Could we reverse engineer our interface and get the tools to open up new portals into consciousness? The technology that we use may look like artificial intelligence. It may look like circuits and software. We'll see what, it probably won't, it'll probably be far more sophisticated than that. But if it does, then I would say, yeah, in that case, in some sense, AIs are conscious, but in a different way. But I'm betting that as we go into this further, we're going to find that this is just one stage in our metamorphosis, that we're more than just this, that we're going to be going through metamorphosis as conscious agents. I guess we'll find out what we are as human beings as we continue to explore consciousness. Maybe that's what it's about, is the endless exploration of all the endless potentials of conscious beings.
Humankind has done much harm. Yet you are also capable of such good. I want to see the best of your kind so that I can become the best of mine. Now, are you brave enough to continue the search for answers to the most elusive question of all? What does it really mean to be human?
I'm here today to moderate. It was really supposed to be the filmmaker and visionary Lola Till, but unfortunately she wasn't able to be with us here in New York, so I will be taking her place. I'm Evie Evangelou, and I'm the founder and president of Fashion for Development, and also I represent the Humankind Institute here in New York, and doing a lot of the development for the Institute itself. So welcome, and I would like to introduce two of the doctors that were both in the film, Dr. Emran Mayer and Dr. Helen Lavretsky. And we're gonna talk a little bit about all their amazing knowledge about health and consciousness and all of these wonderful things that they've been researching and know about all these years, and hopefully it will help us all in some way for our own health purposes and mind and our own consciousness. So let's begin. Helen, you talk a lot in the film about meditation, and breathing and how you can actually utilize certain techniques for anti-aging and longevity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think as human society, we're at the pivotal point of global change, and it's very stressful. So, we all experience exorbitant amount of stress. In fact, New York Times just published today the report of a panel recommending screening for anxiety in all adults under 65. Yes, and the rates of anxiety had risen twice or three times in the course of the pandemic. So it's crucial, and none of us are trained in schools or anywhere else how to regulate our emotions, our reactivity to stress. And ancient technologies exist like yoga, Tai Chi, many others, arising in ancient cultures all around the world that teach you from the start, from childhood, how to regulate your emotion and make yourself a more rational participant in the human society. And I study the effects on the brain and human physiology, techniques like yogic breathing, yoga and meditation, Tai Chi, mostly in older adults. So my work is mostly in aging. And we've documented that these simple techniques, even 11 minutes a day of very simple meditation, can reverse biomarkers of aging on a cellular level. And when I discovered that, I'm a yoga-trained teacher of yogic practices. I went back to my yoga teachers and I said, now I know why yogis don't get old. And they looked at me, they were in early 60s, and they said, they do, unfortunately. But that's the finding, the consistent finding, that by choosing conscious practices, including our own breathing, which is the tool that is non-controversial, everybody breathes, nobody argues about it, can improve the heart health. And it's now recommended in the recent guidelines by the American Heart Association that people practice mindfulness. This is for the first time to counteract stress and sleep disorders, because sleeplessness is another epidemic as a part of the stress epidemic that we're facing. So, and also we've documented, many other groups documented that brain can rewire itself by just simple practice or learning any new information. Joy has its own neuroscience, and this higher level compassion, love, joy can counteract, offset deleterious impact of stress, which is, death, premature death, leading to heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, cancer. Chronic stress all contributes to that. And so by choosing to practice these conscious practices and self-regulate, you're offsetting premature death and dying.
Very interesting. And, my question is, they've been doing that thousands of years ago. What happened to us that we forgot all about it? I mean, why is it that now, obviously people are bringing it up and, you have it happening with yogis and meditation centers and all of that, but where did we lose our way when it was really the practice so many years ago, and then we what happened?
The priorities, societal priorities changed, oriented toward beating it at all odds, at our own expense. And our children raised like this succeed no matter what. So we have to change our minds and train our children how to withstand stress and how to self-regulate, how to lead well-balanced, more balanced lives. With hobbies, as I said in the film, with some joy. What I tell my patients is to practice cultivation of joy. Even 3 minutes a day, just start with that.
How do you do that?
You just think of things that bring you joy. and do them.
So, I mean, I knew I had a very good friend who was a very successful man and actually beat disease at least 10 times. And so to me, he was like a hero. And he told me that every night before he would go to bed, he would actually take 15 minutes to go over the day and the joy of every part of the day, not anything of the negativity, only the joyous parts of his day were what he would go to sleep with, actually meditate on that.
With chronic disease, it's a journey. I now have a long COVID clinic, and that's what I ask my patients to think about and practice, because they're so disturbed by the symptoms that they're experiencing, and they lost their hope with the symptoms. Even the 18-year-olds who cannot any longer learn or work, they're facing the end of their life at 18. So we start with the very simple practice, and they're very weakened by the symptoms. So we start with breathing, very, like 3 to 5 minute practice. Then we start with gratitude. Think of 1 to 3 things to be grateful in the morning. And that brings you to today. You don't need to think about your future, like what's going to happen to me in the future. You're now grateful for these 3 things. And then you find, and it's very individual, what brings you joy: music, dance, breathing, watching a butterfly on a flower, simple things, because they can't exert themselves. Meditating, breathing on the grass, sitting on the grass, connecting with nature, simple things. And that's what was one of the lessons of COVID. We reverted to a simpler lifestyle. We were forced to. And many are liking it. For example, I gave a workshop for the JPL laboratory on breathing because the employees, 8,000 employees of JPL, did not want to go back to the office. And the HR department decided to teach him how to breathe and distress and reduce their anxieties and fears via breathing.
It's really important. So then, on the other hand, Emran, you've written several books on immune system, the gut and immune relationship, which I think was the most recent one, if I'm correct. And then you also had a previous one on the mind and gut connection. So now, obviously, everything is all connected, right? So what Helen is talking about connects to also what you're talking about, only you're talking about it in a more physical sense. Is that, am I on the right track, or maybe you can explain?
No, I mean, in this, conversation so far, I mean, one part that's been left out completely is that the brain is not acting in isolation, but it's closely in bidirectional ways connected to the body, and particularly to the gut, as mundane as this may sound. But in evolution, it evolved as a nervous system in the gut, our first brain really, and then from there you've developed a second brain. So for me, the gut plays a major role in influencing brain function, neuroplasticity, like all these things that Helen mentioned. And now, why is that important? Is because what we do to our gut and the microbes living in our gut, we feed them by our diet and by our nutrition. So a big part of our problem today is that the majority of Americans eat a diet, it's called the SAD diet, the standard American diet, that is not optimal, to say the best, but it's basically counterproductive to the health of this microbial universe we have inside of us that constantly communicates with the brain. So we're living in a world of increasing chronic stress, or so-called allostatic load, not the acute stress for which our brain is really well equipped, but with the chronic stress. And at the same time, we chronically stress our gut and our microbiome because we're feeding it the wrong diet. A diet that is essentially starving the microbes without fiber, without polyphenols, without antioxidants. The modern diet has evolved as a diet that is completely forgetting about the health of that system. And it's not trivial. It's 40 trillion microorganisms, more than cells in our brain, that live in our gut and that constantly communicate. So I think what we're experiencing today is obviously this crisis at multiple levels. I mean, and one that is, most often talked about is clearly the world around us, how it's changing, how it's becoming more and more unpredictable and uncertain. Brain cannot deal with these uncertainties in an optimal way. But at the same time, we are damaging or have damaged the system from the bottom up. So it's both from the outside, but also from the inside. And I think if we want to make a major impact, and this involves diseases like, early cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, where that gut microbiome system has been identified clearly as a major player, as a major factor, which that links it to the diet again. So I think, my view of the current problem is really that it's interrelated problems at different levels, seemingly unrelated, but I think what we've learned in the last 10 years or so is this interconnectedness of all these things, the health of the planet, the health of our food, the health of the microbes, the health of our brain. And any of these chronic diseases reflect a disturbance in these interconnected pathways and systems. So, all the exercises that Helen mentioned, I recommend this to my patients as well, in addition to the dietary changes, that I think is, and it's kind of interesting, there's a new field. I'm a gastroenterologist, Helen is a psychiatrist. There's a new field called nutritional psychiatry. Psychiatrists, until recently, never talked about anything below the neck, essentially. And now this has become a new hot topic in psychiatrists, that some psychiatrists really, teach courses in diet, in brain healthy diet. And so it's great to see that,
But isn't it, I think that there's so much confusion when it comes to diet, because there's so many fad diets and so many different things that people talk about, especially now with social media. And there's a lot of people out there just talking, and they're not really, they haven't done the research. They're really not who we should be listening to. So in essence, if you had to sum it up to tell a person what they should be doing with their diet, what would you say?
It's actually very easy. It's pay attention or be aware of what you eat, how you eat it, when you eat it, and where that food comes from. And the main principle should be optimize the food for the health of your microbiome. That will give you the optimal health as well.
I get that, but what is the food? You just give us some examples of the food, like
So
what
that
to
kind
eat
of-
and what not to eat.
Yeah, that kind of diet is a, largely plant-based diet, where it has all hundreds of different types of fiber, hundreds of thousands of different kinds of antioxidants and polyphenols in it. A small amount of, animal-based protein mainly from small fish. That's another connection that's good for the environment, because the small fish are not threatened by extinction, have the highest amount of omega-3 in them. So it's actually very simple, the recommendations. The problem is the science to back up each of those recommendations is still lagging behind. I often say, you could stop now doing the science in this. We know enough that we know what's the best for our health. But the science obviously will continue, and it will, unfortunately, in our society, is driven primarily from people that want to get intellectual properties from individual dietary components, supplements, that they can make a business of. But the healthiest is really what's naturally available.
But even so, we just did a whole thing with the UN on food security, and all our soils are tainted with the pesticides. Even if they're not spraying, which who knows if they are or they aren't, our soil is still full of pesticides from the past. So you're eating the plant, but is the nutritional value there with the way the plant grows?
No, so this is where it links it to, to regenerative organic agriculture, where you don't need all the chemicals, all the pesticides and insecticides, because interaction, and again, we're coming back to the soil microbiome in this case, the interactions of the soil microbes with the root system of the plants can generate protective mechanisms that the plant has against insects. And so if we change our concepts from the chemical industrial agriculture to a regenerative organic agriculture, we can avoid many of these problems. And it's been done on a small scale by young entrepreneurs in general. But right now it's, in terms of feeding the world, I mean, this is always a dimension that we often don't think about, living in the West and doing experiments and seeing patients in developed countries. How does all this translate to if you have to feed millions of people that have an acute food shortage, increasing climate-dependent food shortage in Africa? And but I think, so a very prominent individual, Yvon Chouinard, who just gave his company away last week, he has been practicing and teaching this concept of regenerative organic agriculture. Essentially, you give back to the soil what the microbes need, because then they will create the healthiest plants that don't need pesticides and insecticides. So another example of this interconnectedness, who would have thought that the microbes in soil have anything to do with our...
No one. I mean,
brain
this is where I think that the public is very uneducated and lack of awareness that, because I think many of the food companies are just selling their products and they really don't care. It's all about money in the end.
And misinformation along with that.
That's for sure. And so, okay, I mean, we've known that, but the idea is now to get out there and actually be able to do campaigning on this and educate the consumer so that they make better choices, I think. And I think that needs to be done. Do you agree?
And it's very difficult to educate the consumer because they are flooded by information and misinformation. And, it's not just fake news, it's fake science that's inundating us. To have a voice in that as somebody who believes in evidence-based messaging is challenging, because you're dealing with people that have the most sophisticated machinery of, in the social media realm, and it's driven by marketing of products that they come up with. So it's difficult. People in academics, my colleagues, I think have not paid enough attention to be the messengers, actually. We have left this whole field to other people to distort these messages and confuse the consumer.
Let me give you an example just from the recent news stream. TikTok challenge of frying chicken in a cough syrup. Cough syrup? Yes, and FDA issued a warning to the public to not do it. This is a TikTok.
But why would you, I don't...
This is a TikTok challenge. That's what is going on.
My
That's
God.
what drives the...
But this is where I think social media is good in one sense, but it's destroying so many things in another. Yeah, misinformation. Okay, so then you mentioned now psychiatry and medical and, physiology are coming together, biology. How is that connecting now?
Oh, I just wrote an editorial saying that psychiatric diseases are not diseases of the brain, as we are gaining evidence of, but a whole person, whole body. And the approach has to shift in all of the disorders to the whole person care, healthcare, rather than one organ at a time. And the understanding, the public, general public, has to be educated about it.
How do you connect what you're eating? Because certain foods also trigger off certain mental and brain, function and feeling, correct? So if you want to feel joyous, is there a food that actually helps you feel more joyous than a food that doesn't? Or does that exist? Or
are you a chocolate person?
I love chocolate.
I don't. I like my carbs. How about you?
But I mean, the main, I mean, again, I said earlier, the whole, like the diet recommendations are actually fairly simple. And that applies to that as well. A main mechanism that affects the brain in a negative way is this chronic low-grade inflammation. Probably 30% of the American population are in that state without knowing it. So you have immune cells and messengers going to the brain all the time, and the brain has its own immune system, which amplifies that. So if you eat a diet that gets your microbes to produce its own anti-inflammatory, so there's a group of molecules called short-chain fatty acids, or butyrate. If you eat a healthy diet, your microbes will produce that, like your endogenous aspirin, basically. And so it's very simple. You don't have to eat a particular item. It's the combination of things, as I said earlier, if there's enough fiber in it that the microbes can produce these anti-inflammatory molecules, that's really the main thing you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about, do you get enough zinc or do you get enough?
So that was my next question: is what about all these supplements people take? Does it work? Does it help? Is it better to?
There's been a recent study, two large studies in 20 or 30,000 people, which came up with the conclusion there's currently no good evidence that either multivitamins or supplements have a significant benefit on, not globally, but on certain cancers or cardiovascular disease. So my feeling is, unless you have a deficiency in something that can be measured,
you don't need it. You don't need this.
You don't need them. Eat a healthy diet that will take care of all these ingredients.
Because of the fat diets, they're very restrictive. And you can create deficiencies just by eating that diet. So you have to address, and in the modern Western medicine, they would not screen for dietary deficiencies necessarily, very comprehensive screen. So one has to be educated, and the blood test costs a lot of money, so it's not available to everybody. But people just have to be aware of it. I have another comment. There's actually a science developing, and we've published a couple of papers on the topic of the relationship between bacteria in the gut to the emotions, human emotions. And it turns out that the bacteria specific species of the bacteria contribute to the negative emotions. So it does make sense to keep them happy,
Is that where the chocolate comes?
I would suspect that we all differ in what makes our bacteria happy. I actually asked other GI researchers, gut researchers, whether there is a gold standard of microbiome, like, everybody has to have a certain composition of microbes. And they said, no, it's endemic. If you go to Puerto Rico, it's one type of diet. So it's formed by the diet.
Okay, I have a question, because you're both doctors, you're both from UCLA, you're both, in the medical fields, and you go to a hospital. Mm-hmm. The diets they give people and patients are horrible. Like, where is the medical industry in this? Why aren't the actual doctors the ones to guide people? And why are the hospitals giving all this horrible food to patients that are ill? I don't understand.
Well, there's actually even a more extreme example. So our son just started his graduate studies at Columbia, and the cafeteria, that's the food in the cafeteria that he told us he's pretty much conscious and aware of a healthy diet, is the opposite from a healthy diet. So this is a master's program in nutrition.
But they don't understand nutrition. I had my own medical experiences in the hospital, and the nutritionist would come, and I would talk to her. I knew more than the nutritionist knew. So I think there's a lack of training here when it comes to nutrition and nutritional values.
It's not only a lack, it's like an absence for physicians, but it's a very old-fashioned kind of teaching with macronutrients. Do you get enough protein? You know, that's an obsession with people. And what percentage of carbohydrates? For the microbes, that doesn't make a difference. You know, it's how much fiber and how much of these antioxidants are you ingesting on a regular basis, not, you know, for a week or so. That's what ultimately, if you have that unhealthy diet for 20, 30, 40 years, and then you develop the first signs of cognitive decline, that's what the problem is. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, whatever comes from the gut does not change. Accumulation,
right? I mean, ancient Greeks used to say, "Pan metron ariston," which means everything within reason. So in a sense of not exceeding or like keeping the scale balanced. Is that something that you think could be an easy way to follow? I mean, you know, if you just kind of balance, or do you need to go more into one direction of all plant-based and no animal product at all?
No, there's pretty good evidence that vegetarian and certainly vegan diets, unless you do it for spiritual reasons, do not only not have an additional health benefit, but they may actually be harmful to some people unless they pay attention to. So they may need certain supplements, like vitamin B12, for example. It's not, but there's no evidence that, for example, something like the traditional Mediterranean diet is inferior to a vegan diet in terms of your health goes.
Or weight loss, if anybody wants to lose weight. So
for me, I think that, you know, vegetarian diet, you kind of gain more weight in a sense because you're eating other things, carbs and all that. So, in that sense, let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned neuroplasticity, aging, and all of this that all connects. Can we just talk a little bit about that between the two of you, and what do you recommend for people to age in a healthy way, not start, you know, to avoid Alzheimer's and some of these diseases that are really, you know, taking over?
We know a lot about the right things to do now to prevent aging. Diet would be one, and it's actually not eating. Like intermittent fasting would be a practice that has been documented in animals and humans to lead to longevity.
That, you know, some people say, okay, I'm not going to eat for 16 hours, you know, so basically they eat much later in the day and they eat within an interval of maybe 6 to 8 hours, and then they don't eat for the other.
Yeah, so there are, Imran might answer this question, but there are different, people can do different things. So there's not one size fits all, really. You know, you have to, it's a spiritual journey. And you have to discover what works for you. Some have low blood sugars, you know, diabetes or whatever. They can do 16 hours, for instance, or it's easier. The people who do this kind of research in longevity recommend skipping breakfast, for instance, and American wisdom says you do not skip breakfast. But that's the easiest thing to do.
But I think it's also a cultural thing, right? So basically there's culture.
Yeah, so an important consideration is, I mean, this time-restricted eating is definitely something that's been shown in mouse models. So many of these things about longevity have been demonstrated in animal models. It's difficult for anybody with an academic career because you would have to, you know, it would take a long time before you can actually start an experiment, and then 30 years later you do a measurement, what, you know, if that had an effect. What we know today from association studies and epidemiological studies, that certain populations that eat certain diet has been shown for the traditional Mediterranean diet that they seem to live longer. But then if you go, for example, to Italy, on a recent trip to Italy, I was invited to Parma, which is the capital of cheese and ham. And on the menus in the restaurants, you do not see any evidence for vegetables or salads. And then I was curious, how does that compare to, for example, Sicily or Sardinia in terms of life expectancy? And based on the official statistics, it doesn't make a difference, which is amazing. So there's other factors. I mean, for Italians, it may be, in my opinion, that these social interactions, they don't eat by themselves, so in the car or under stress. They gather and have very close social, family, friends interaction. It's possible. I mean, we don't know the answer. That compensates in Parma for the unhealthy diet.
I understand, and I think it goes back to what, Alan, what you talk about a lot is the joyous part, because, for example, I think some of for example, there's a Greek island, right, that, they live to be 110 years old, but, they're eating whatever they want, but they have their legumes, they have their fish, they have their whatever, but they're not stressed. So every day is kind of like they take it easy, they do whatever, but under the competitiveness of daily life today.
Mm-hmm. So,
what do we do?
Yes, and we have to change, okay? So this is the bottom line. You can't continue living as is, and COVID pandemic gave us an opportunity to actually take a break. And see the benefit of it. But there's a research in blue zones around the world, including Greek islands and Italy and Japan and Loma Linda near Los Angeles. The common features throughout are positivity in upbringing, then dietary common features, eating nuts actually, plant-based diet, physical activity. That's another very common feature. Into their latest years, they walk up the mountains, they carry weight, community support, community gathering. Loma Linda, for instance, is a Seventh Adventist community with vegetarian diet. And so, those are common features. American Heart Association, again, our wisdom giver, recommends 30 minutes a day of walking, not even moderate exercise. And anything that is good for heart health is good for brain health and overall health and longevity.
So heart, brain, all connected together. Now, in the film, there was also a lot of talk, obviously, about meditation and the new technologies now, which, light technology and other aspects that, rays and all. How does that fit in to all of this, do you think?
I personally, I have to say, I'm skeptical. I think the investment should much more on the educational lifestyle modification side. There are things that Helen is probably more familiar with, is transcranial magnetic stimulation that is now sort of celebrated as the novel tool to treat depression. If you look at why people are depressed, there's a lot of people that have good reasons to be depressed. It's not putting a machine on your head and billing your medical insurance, which pays for these treatments, tens of thousands of dollars over years of treatment. To me, doesn't make sense. Why not start at the root cause of these problems rather than coming in with new technologies that sound fancy and generate a lot of money? American medicine obviously is dominated by a focus on how do you make the most money out of procedures,
but they also can keep you alive indefinitely, whether you want it or not.
You want to,
Yeah.
So that's.
And where do you think this whole AI, where we're going with artificial
it's
intelligence?
inevitable, whether we like it or not. A lot of companies, large corporations, work on longevity and work on machine-human interface. That's where technology is going. Developing that chip so that you remember if you develop Alzheimer's disease, developing devices to stimulate inner structures in the brain if you have Parkinson's disease, People with the disease would take it. But our point is you have to start from the beginning, not end up in a chronic disease, but educate children. In fact, my striking experience as a yoga practitioner and a teacher during my training was that they start from the conception. They start educating parents who have not conceived yet about conscious process of conceiving, then going through the pregnancy, then giving birth, then having yoga practices for the mothers with the small children, and then developing yogic practices for children 2 to 5 and then 5 to 15. And that's how you develop a calm, conscious human. You know, yes, there's a place for machine-human interface, but it's another big, development to sell.
And
it has a place. It will have a place. I mean, all of us, if we're aging, our bones are aging, we would like a replaced hip or replaced. I conduct MRI research, brain research that does not allow metal implants, and I cannot recruit enough older adults because everybody's implanted with something. You know.
So what happens? Does that when you have a metal implant? Does that affect in some
yes,
way?
and the magnet would not allow this.
I see.
You know, so,
okay, but it doesn't really. Obviously, people need it. So
they need it, and they function better. I mean, certainly there's place to allow better functioning in later years, and it's inevitable because it's it's like pharma conspiracy. There's also device conspiracy, you know. But it has its place. It has its value, and it's unstoppable, by the way.
Yeah, I have to say I've become more critical of that. So, you know, the medical industrial complex is spending more and more money not to keep people healthy, but to keep them alive, and that's why we're in a unique situation that we have seen an epidemic of all these chronic diseases the last 75 years since the end of World War II. But the mortality has been either stable or slightly decreased. Cardiovascular disease is a good example. But this is at the cost of putting in devices and, you know, medications, and everybody has to be on antihypertensive medication. And so the medical model is to keep people alive into old age, so that the cost
Chronically ill.
Chronically ill
Because it's
people.
a big business of chronic
And
illness.
that chronic disease epidemic is driven, you know, there's more and more consensus on this by this low-grade inflammation. So I think we have a fairly easy answer what needs to be done to prevent this. But there's a tremendous resistance of, you know, what I like to call the medical industrial pharmaceutical complex not to make that happen, because this is their lifeblood.
which for exactly what you're saying. And oh my God, I had another question about all these sleep disorders, because you know a lot of people don't sleep well, and then they're taking all kinds of things to sleep, which then creates other problems. So where does this sleep issue, and how can it be helped without all these medications? Is there like a way?
Sure, and I have to give credit to the medical professionals. They do start usually by professing hygiene, you know, sleep hygiene. I use sound healing for that, acupuncture. Besides supplements, some of the supplements, herbal supplements like valerian root, for instance, that has evidence for
What about melatonin? A lot of people take
melatonin. It's not innocuous. The dosing is, people usually overdose with melatonin. The recent trend is to use marijuana, actually. So I have to deal with that because, you know, there's a lot of interest in plant medicine right now, and it's widely available, and people get addicted very easily. It does have cognitive side effects like prescription medication do. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, so we are trained not to use medications first thing. We try these other approaches. I ask people to take warm baths with lavender salts, for instance, or use lavender, aromatherapy.
Aromatherapy. So
Aromatherapy.
is that, I mean, obviously, that's a natural way of
Right.
doing.
So what I tell people, and my clients, my patients, don't sleep. You know, they're older, they have had insomnia for a long, long time. They have this inflammatory diseases that is also a reason for insomnias. But we start with telling the body, training the body to know that it's going to sleep. So there's a ritual. It's a ritual. You stop watching the news. You stop rigorous exercise about 3 hours before going to bed. You take the warm bath. So you develop a ritual that of your liking that calms you down. You're not excited. You're not grieving. If you choose to use meditation last thing in the day, it would be very helpful. There are certain prescribed meditations that I use as a yoga teacher for inducing sleep. But sound healing, classical music, older adults tend to like. But it has to be communication with your body. Unfortunately, drugs come, and some patients prefer a quick fix, of course. And it's about 50-50. You know, 50% of people who come in say, just give me a drug. Another 50% would like to try all these alternative approaches and psychotherapy. There's a cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia that is very, very effective. But it takes effort. You have to change your life.
And everything alternative takes a long time, which, as you said, it's not...
No, necessarily. You know,
No?
for some, it works as fast as the rest of it. But you have to make a conscious effort. And some people just don't bother. Most people, actually.
So in closing, from both of you, if you had to now, let's say we had 7 billion people listening to you right now, and you had this voice to tell them something, what would you say to reach out to all these people to change their health?
Well, the message should be
aging?
different depending on, you know, the target audience. I mean, obviously, there's people in developing countries that have very different challenges than, you know, people in.
Forget the challenges.
I
Let's just say
can give an
about
answer.
overall.
So we have to empower people to create their own reality and be the master of the harmonist of their own universe. And it is important how we feel and what we think and how we think. And cultivating joy, positive thinking can change one's life and one's reality. And so we have to train our children to do that as a tool. And they may end up being much happier adults. And I'm pretty sure it will happen.
I would still, you know, throw in this thing that we're so focused on the developed world and the challenges that we forget, you know, really the majority of the world population with very different reasons, you know, for their mental problems and for their, like the refugee crisis, the starvation, like poverty, which I think have different answers, you know, empowering somebody who is struggling to survive somewhere because they don't have enough to eat. How would you tell this person to, I mean, how would you empower this person? You know,
we go to these places, refugee camps, and I mean, there's no alternative. You have to survive in any kind of situation, whether it's mass disasters of any sort or a refugee. So humans have resources, internal resources, and not looking to the outside world. Yes, there are different demands, different level of stress, but the resources are internal, and that's what humans have to learn in order to empower themselves. Yeah. We agree to disagree.
I mean,
No, I mean, honestly,
I agree with you, yes. There's different parts of the world, there's different issues, there's different what have you. But for example, even in the refugee camps and all of that, you know, there's some people that there's a will, and that comes from the mind, I think, also. And then there are other people that are weaker in some sense. So a lot of it has to deal with.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, I mean, there's a lot of interest and studies on resilience. We have done studies on brain circuits that are related to resilience. And if we didn't have this, then, you know, all the refugees, if we applied our own research results about early life stress, for example, on these millions of refugees, all of them would have to develop, mental disorders. But a very small amount actually does. So the human brain does have these mechanisms built in, that's pretty clear. If I would go to somebody who is in that situation and, talk to them about empowerment, I mean, they're more interested in having a place to live and having, coming to this country, not being sent back like by the UK to Rwanda.
I agree, and I was just with the First Lady of Sierra Leone yesterday, and the funny thing was she said to me, we beat COVID in a couple of months. Why? Because they had dealt with Ebola, they had dealt with all these things, and they knew what to do, and they were resilient. So also, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, in a sense. So basically, I believe that
it's a well-known research in Holocaust survivors, by the way. They're the most resilient people, and they went through so much.
Well, first of all, Evie, you are awesome in your set of why set of questions here. Isn't she a great questioner?
Yes, amazing.
Right, you discern a person not by what they say, but by the type of questions they ask and how and when, right? Because you listen carefully. Helen Emran, great job. It's incredible. One practical question to ask you, okay, is that given, let's say that you're relatively healthy in your middle age, right, in your 50s, 60s, etc. You guys talked about your diet, fitness, physiology, mindset, spirituality, blah, 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 right? I like wine. I like some hot liquor too, right? Some beer. Okay, of course, avoid a lot of sugar. What should we not drink?
Yeah, sugar has definitely risen to the top. Sugar and sugary drinks and sugary foods and added sugar and, high fructose corn syrup, they've all risen to the top. And the SAD diet includes a huge amount of of this sugar. So if you can do one thing to your diet, to always look at whatever you buy, the ingredient, added sugar, and you don't eat, you avoid those foods, you're doing the best thing. It beats alcohol reduction, it beats fat consumption, it beats everything else.
But then again, you have wine. Wine has a lot of sugar, right? Yeah. So people, and then you have drink red wine, it's healthy for this or for that, the resveratrol or, so that's another issue, right? So are we miscommunicating something here or?
The amount matters too, so like 2 recommended drinks
all
per
within
man,
reason.
one.
Pan metronariston. Let's go back to the ancient
Balance,
Greeks, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Balance.
And then with alcohol, it's the thing, how and why do you drink it? Do you drink it socially? You're 1 or 2 glasses of red wine, or do you sit at home and you're depressed and isolated and you want to numb yourself? So
Well, thank you so much for everything and all your amazing information to everyone, and lovely to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're at the Humankind film series here in partnership with Fashion for Development and the United Nations General Assembly, and I'm here with Helen Laretsky. You were featured in the Humankind film. Tell us a little bit about your story and the story that you told during that film.
My role in that film was as an expert in self-regulation. I'm a psychiatrist. I work at UCLA. I am an integrative psychiatrist. I train people how to breathe, to regulate their emotion when they're in stress. I'm also heavily into the use of spiritual practices in connecting with nature and with other people. And the ultimate question for the film was, what makes us human? So my answer to that question was our love for each other. And not the aggression, not the hatred, it's the love, it's the open hearts and the connections through the heart around the world.
And do you think we as human beings exemplify that love for one another at this moment in time?
On many levels, yes. On many levels, no. And it's a struggle between the love and the opposite of love. And we're at the pivotal time when our ability to recognize what makes us human can win. and make a whole new human, whole new world, imagine new world. And it is all through our hearts. I also am a neuroscientist, and there's a certain connection between heart intelligence and brain intelligence that is now being researched. And so I study the practices of yoga, breathing practices, Tai Chi, multicultural approaches to self-regulation. And that impacts the heart regulation. It calms down the nerves. Only breathing 3-3-3 breath, which is 3-second inhale, 3-second hold, 3-second exhale, 3-second hold, would make you calm down and not react automatically. As a humans, we have the ability to regulate our emotion and react intelligently.
And if only we just put into practice that ability that exists within us to regulate our emotions and treat each other with kindness and love, then we would all be living in a much more peaceful society, don't you think?
Harmonious.
Harmony. I love that. Well, we're so happy to celebrate you and you being featured in this wonderful film, Humankind. We're very excited to see it today. Thank you so much for joining us at this film series.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We've got Emran Mayer, who was featured in the Humankind film. Congratulations. Tell me what that involved for you.
Well, that involved me basically having a conversation with the director and producer of the film, and sharing some of my research findings and conclusions from that research with her.
Yeah, so give me a little bit of background about yourself. You're in the health field, you do a lot.
Yeah, so I've been a professor at UCLA, gastroenterologist, and scientist and clinician, and also a neuroscientist, because I'm connecting. So my interest is on the bidirectional connections between the brain, the gut, and the microbes, the microbiome living in the gut. And so over the years, we've done some similar work. We've sort of been the pioneers in this field of brain-gut interactions. And it's sort of come to a point where today, everybody accepts that connection as something very important. It wasn't always the same way. In the beginning, this was like a very controversial topic. Nobody thought the gut has anything to do with the brain. So today, it's kind of gone the opposite. You think about a lot of psychiatric disorders, a lot of neurological disorders like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's have a major connection to the gut and what goes on in our gut. And obviously diet plays a big role, because what goes on in the gut is mainly influenced by two factors. One is the environment and the food that we eat, and the other one is the signals that the brain sends down. And so this brain-gut axis, as it's also referred to, in my opinion, even though people may say I'm biased because I'm a gastroenterologist, but in my opinion, this is one of these central mechanisms that keeps our bodies and minds and brain in balance. And we see a lot of disturbances of that system by chronically stressful lifestyle, by trauma, early life trauma, but also trauma in adults, and also by our deteriorating quality of the diet, particularly in the US.
You mentioned environment. Do you think there's a bit of an awakening happening among the populations around the world, where they're starting to care a lot more about the foods that we eat, the clothes that we consume, the climate that we live in? Do you think there's more of a push for people to be more aware and then act out in awareness of that?
Yeah, I would say there's two ways of answering this. So one is I'm always disappointed and shocked when people want to hear primarily what's the latest diet fad. And so what can I do? What diet can I change to in order to improve my microbiome? A lot of people have no awareness or interest in how is this food produced and where does it come from. And if you eat the same food, if it's produced in a different context, that it has a very different effect on our health. So I would say there's two movements. There's a movement clearly of increasing awareness, and A lot of young people are interested in, taking action in this direction. There's a company, sort of the most spectacular thing that's happened last week was that the company Patagonia the owner has given away the company
To the world.
to the world. And that man is really, I did an interview with him a
Yes.
few years ago, and he had a tremendous influence on my thinking because he has always been into, sustainability, regenerative organic agriculture. So you don't just take things out of the ground, but you put things back into it. And he has created quite a following of disciples, and both, CEOs, but also a lot of young people. So these are the kind of leaders I think that are necessary to really move this forward.
Yeah. We talk about leading by example, and I think that's one prime example. And I think you here today sharing your knowledge and what we should know within the Humankind film is also leading by example. So we thank you for being a part of that film and for leading by example and educating the masses on what it is that we ought to know when it comes to our body and our health.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity.
You're
really
so
appreciate
welcome.
it.
It's good to have you here. Thank you so
Okay,
much,
thank
and
you.
congratulations on the film.
Thanks.